Cars like this remind me that, hey, there are things about America that aren't so bad, like a 670 horsepower LT4 supercharged V8. What's up, guys? Today we're reviewing the Cadillac CT5-V Blackwing, and I have a huge smile on my face because I just got finished destroying both an M5 competition and an S63 on the turnpike. Yeah, they didn't want the smoke, but man, there is so much to love about this car. For $100,000, there's definitely better options if you want the most luxurious option or the most technologically advanced and savvy vehicle. But as a performance machine, there quite honestly isn't anything else like this. And I knew before taking delivery of this car that it was Car and Driver and Road and Tracks Performance Car of the Year and all that fancy stuff, won a bunch of awards and all that good stuff. But I gotta say, the hype is truly real, and I can finally say that I understand why after having this for nearly a week now. I've put over 500 miles on the car, and it's been an absolute blast. I think this has been my favorite car I've ever gotten to review thus far, and let me explain why. One of the things I love about this car from a design perspective is that it's truly an if you know kind of vehicle in terms of the styling and the fact that this is essentially Cadillac's flagship vehicle from a performance standpoint. You've got pretty wide fender flares and, a few badges here and there, but other than that, this isn't a very shouty car in terms of letting you know that this is the CT5-V Blackwing. Kind of like how the old BMW M cars used to be, where there wasn't a bunch of M badges everywhere and stripes and a bunch of aesthetic things to let you know that, hey, this is the M version of the car. Cars like the E39 M5 from the early 2000s were extremely subtle in terms of letting you know that this was the high-performance version of the vehicle. So there's definitely been people coming up to me, whether at the gas station or when I'm out at a park filming the car, and be like, hey, is that the CT5-V Blackwing? And so it's really just like, if you know, you know. But people outside of the car enthusiast community normally don't pay attention to this car really at all from a styling perspective. I've had a few people just go, hey, nice car, but I think that's just because it's clean and it looks new, and I think some people are just Cadillac fans in general. It definitely looks like a Cadillac in terms of overall design language. They're not going, way off script like other, high-performance luxury brands have been known to do in the past handful of years. It still very much looks like a Cadillac, but I think with a very modern aesthetic. It's something that I'm truly a fan of. For $100,000, which is what this vehicle costs, it's definitely not on par with a Mercedes, I'd say Audis, BMWs, etc. Like, one aspect of this vehicle that just feels extremely cheap, and I'm reminded of it every time I use it, is this turn signal stock. Like, I swear this is the cheapest turn signal stock I've ever experienced in a car I've reviewed, or maybe even been inside of, that's anywhere near this price point. It feels mushy, flimsy. It's like they pulled this out of like a $15,000 car and threw it in here. Thankfully, not every aspect of the interior experience in terms of buttons and controls is as bad as this turn signal stock, but hopefully a turn signal stock is something that everyone's using in their car every day, and assuming you're using it in a vehicle like this, you're gonna constantly be reminded that even though you paid $100,000 for this car, corners were cut in certain areas, and certain aspects of the interior are an example of that. Would I say I'm disappointed in the overall interior experience for what you would pay for this car? No, and that's because it still feels very performance-y in here. We've got, the carbon fiber trim and the door handles, the center console. We've also got these very nice aluminum paddle shifters that are very clicky. They're super nice to engage with. We'll talk about overall transmission feel a little bit later, but these paddle shifters in and of themselves are very nice to engage with. They feel extremely premium. One of the better paddle shifters that I've experienced in a GM product. Something I can appreciate about the interior is the seats. You've got these carbon bucket style seats, although I'm pretty sure there's no carbon fiber in the seats at all. They're actually Alcantara backed, which I'm sure looks very nice for whoever's sitting in the back seat. Overall, they're pretty firm, and if you're sitting in the car for like an hour, 2 hours, it's not going to be the greatest experience. Although I'm pretty sure, a huge aspect of the way these seats are made are performance oriented, not exactly for luxury grand touring. But unlike bucket seats that you'd find in a Porsche or a McLaren, cars like that, these are heated and cooled and electronically adjustable. Overall, the seats definitely look better than they feel. And if we were talking about going on like a 5 or 6 hour road trip, maybe even longer, 11, 12-hour road trip, there's going to be many points in time where you're just going to want to get out and not have your butt in these seats for like a minute or two, just because they're very firm. They're not the most plush feeling seat. They're definitely not as comfortable as something you'd find in a BMW M5 or a Mercedes S63. But given what this car was designed to do, it's not something that's going to make me detract points from my overall score of the experience. In terms of technology, I think this car is quite adequate. We've got a wireless charger up here in the front, right above your gear selector. You've got wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. The infotainment has enough features for you to feel like this car is modern. It was built in 2020 or later. And the 360 camera and parking view works very well. It's always been very good at allowing me to get into spots very quickly. And it even has very accurate and very precise sensors for notifying you of when you're close to pedestrians, notifying you of when you're close to hitting an object. Overall, from a technology standpoint, this car pretty much checks all the boxes if you're asking me, especially if something that's more performance oriented. You've got an 8kg sound system in the CT5-V Blackwing, and overall, I'm a pretty big fan of them. They're not blowing me away in terms of sound quality, but they have very good bass response. You know, it gets decently loud, which you're gonna need at certain points in time, because if you're in track mode or sport mode, the exhaust can be, very noticeable. But overall, I'm a huge fan of the overall clarity of the sound experience. And for people who have owned Cadillacs in the past, I think this is something that most people will be satisfied with. This is a nearly 4,000 pound car. It's about 3,800 and some change. And to some people, especially people who are considering this to be a sports car, that puts this in more of the boat category. But how does it feel on the inside in terms of overall spaciousness and roominess? Well, it's not that large feeling on the inside for sure. And that's something I'm actually a fan of, because I feel like if you're in this massive cabin with just an endless amount of room, that takes away from the sporty aspect of the driving. I wouldn't say this car is cramped or small by any means for a 5-seater sedan. I'd say it's a very intimate experience in terms of the way it feels on the inside of the cabin. You feel like the cabin is small enough to where you can still feel connected to the road and to the overall driving aspect of the experience. But it's definitely spacious enough for the bigger guy, unlike the Toyota Supra, which I had a few weeks ago. I'd say overall, this is a car that can pretty much fit any size. Let's talk performance. Obviously, the star of the show here with this car, and pretty much 70% of the reason why you would buy one of these, is of course the GM-derived LT4, which is a 668 horsepower supercharged 6.2-liter V8. This motor is incredible, paired with this 10-speed gearbox, and I'll talk about auto versus manual in terms of which one I think you should buy a little bit later. But I have never driven a car that pulls so insanely hard in the higher gears. Even in 8th or 9th gear, you can just fly if you want to. The power band of this motor is so vast that it feels like it'll just never end, really. And I think the more impressive part is how well this car puts all the power down, because this is not an all-wheel drive car like, an RS7 or a BMW M5 competition. This is rear-wheel drive, so all that near 700 horsepower is going all to the rear wheel. The differential in this car is godlike, because if the tires are warm enough, the road is relatively dry, there's pretty much no wheel spin as far as you feeling a significant delay in getting going in a straight line. The power of this car is extremely immense, and you feel that both in the high and low end of the power band, but it manages to not overbear the chassis at all. It's extremely confident. Like I said, when you're up to temp in terms of the tire temperature, the roads are dry, you will just go. You'll just fly. It's not going to be like a Dodge Charger or Challenger Hellcat, where if you floor it, you're just going to be flying all over the place, going from left to right. It's very composed, way more composed than I ever thought a nearly 700 horsepower rear-wheel drive car could be. Now, don't get me wrong, if you just hop in this car and start flooring it from a standstill, especially when your tires are not warm enough, you will skirt to the side a little bit, but I think it's just a perfect amount of sideways where you'll be able to have fun, but not feel like, oh my God, am I actually going to spin out and die, And when you're driving this car in the midst of torrential downpour or snowy, icy roads, or just like in the dark on a wet road. You're definitely gonna miss all-wheel drive at certain points in time, but I think for most situations, and especially if you live in a warm climate area, the rear-wheel drive, I've gotta say, is quite superior. If there's anything I'm not the biggest fan of in this motor, it's just how quickly you hit redline. I feel like I could use for about another 500 to 800 RPM before having to shift, because especially in first gear, I've noticed that I hit redline super early. And something I definitely love about this motor is the fact that it's supercharged versus being twin turbo. I think that allows a lot more pure sound to come from this engine. And so it has really the characteristics of a naturally aspirated motor, but with all the benefits you're getting from forced induction, except you don't have turbo lag. It kind of just goes as soon as you put your foot down. And I could only imagine how much of a missile this car would be if there was all-wheel drive. It would be probably crazy. And let's talk about the sound in this car. This is easily one of the loudest stock cars I've ever gotten to review or drive. It sounds absolutely brutal. It is a freaking monster of a car when it comes to the sound. I think just compared to a lot of the twin turbo V8 cars, a lot of the twin turbo V6 cars, even the ones that can rev decently high, there's just so much character to the sound. You get nice long pops, cracks, and burbles when you got it in sport mode. This is definitely not the car for the older guy where, you know, he wants something like quiet and Grand Toury-ish. This is not for that guy. This is for the guy that constantly wants to be reminded that he's in a true performance-oriented sports car. And a lot of the time, people don't want to put a nearly 4,000-pound sedan in the sports car category, but this 100% fits the bill because of the way this thing drives. It is an absolute ball. I think the chassis balance in combination with the rear-wheel drive allows this car to handle absolutely beautifully. Now, yes, if you fly into a corner and punch it, you'll be reminded that, yes, this is a rear-wheel drive car with a lot of power. But if you know what you're doing, I think you're going to have a lot of fun with this thing. I mean, I think you'll have a lot of fun with this car in terms of handling regardless, as far as the way it takes turns, even if you are spinning out just a little bit. But man, it takes corners and sharp turns so freaking confidently, and it's so bizarre to me that it feels much better to maneuver this car at higher speeds than it does at lower speed. It doesn't feel the best in terms of the turning radius as far as getting out of parking spots or getting into parking spots in a parking lot or something like that. But when going around a tight bend or speeding into a corner on the road, it feels so natural. I can only imagine how much fun you could have in this car when taking it on the track. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to get to do that today, but if you own this car and you don't track it, you are doing something wrong. You truly are. Something I'm a fan of when it comes to the customization of this car is how you've got several different modes. We've got touring mode, snow and ice, track, sport, and then an individual mode in addition to a V mode, which basically just turns everything up to the max. I'm a big fan of the fact that you can customize these individual modes to your liking and truly get the best experience for whatever situation you're in. It did snow a few days into me getting the car, and so it was good to experience the snow and ice mode in its natural habitat. I definitely wasn't going too crazy given the nature of this vehicle, nearly 700 horsepower to the rear wheels, but it felt extremely confident when driving at normal to semi-high speeds on the damp, icy, snowy road. Now, is it as good as having an all-wheel drive car in those conditions? Absolutely not, but I think it's more than suitable. You also can customize the performance traction. You've got inactive, wet, and dry, and sport. And then you've got 2 race modes as well that will turn off the electronic stability control. But overall, I'm just a big fan of the fact that you can customize this car to kind of be ready for any occasion. Like I said, it's never going to be as good as certain all-wheel drive vehicles, like if you're driving in torrential downpour or a scary, slippery snow situation, but at least Cadillac is trying to give you some customization to make it suitable for the vast majority of driving situations, which is something that I like. If there were to be any glaring negatives as far as a downside when it comes to the performance, it would have to be the transmission. So you can get this car in either a 6-speed daddy manual or a 10-speed automatic. We're driving the automatic, and as a daily, I think the automatic makes more sense. I'm usually always going to argue that an automatic makes more sense for a car that you're going to drive every day, especially if you have a commute that involves, a decent amount of traffic going home. At least that would be my preference. I know people who will easily drive a manual car every day in any condition. Personally, that's just not me. But I would also prefer for my automatic transmission to be fun and nice to engage with. And I gotta say, I would have definitely preferred like a 7-speed dual clutch compared to this 10-speed automatic. It definitely feels like a bottleneck compared to the motor itself, where shifts just feel a little sluggish and not really that sharp. I think the ZF 8-speed that's used in cars like Toyota Supra, the Maserati that I reviewed, other high-performance sports cars, that's definitely the better transmission to have. All of the sounds that this car makes as you're upshifting, downshifting, absolutely wonderful. But when it comes to just the pure feeling of shifting gears, it's very underwhelming, I gotta say. I think it's safe to say that for the high 90, low $100,000 price point, as far as something that delivers pure excitement, a little bit of fear, confidence, I don't think there's anything else out there like the Cadillac CT5-V Blackwing. You could get the CT4-V Blackwing, which offers, a more compact size and probably handles a little bit better. I'm not sure, I haven't driven it. But this V8 just hits different, The sound is just absolutely monstrous, and I don't think a twin turbocharged V6 is going to give you that same experience. Sure, you could get a Dodge Challenger or Charger Hellcat for significantly less, maybe $10,000, $15,000, $20,000, depending on the mileage, but they're a lot more common. They're impossible to get going from a standstill if you actually want to, put the power down a little bit. Then you have cars like the Audi RS7, the BMW M5, the Mercedes E63S. With their all-wheel drive systems, they're incredibly competent and composed. Those cars almost feel like you just can't mess up when trying to really send it, And while the twin-turbo V8s in those cars sound good for sure, it just doesn't quite hit like the supercharged V8 does, in my opinion. And so, for $100,000, if you want the most pure, raw, exciting, scary driving experience from a 4-door sedan, this is it. This is it. But that's going to be about it for this video. If you enjoyed, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe for future content like this. And what I'm going to do is spend the last 24 hours I have with this car absolutely sending it, because that's what you're supposed to do. Thanks for watching. Let's go.